Some tales for dark nights.
Cold Wind, Cold Earth by Preston Wu. Performed by Otis Jiry. With little evidence towards his innocence, he is to be hanged the Monday from next on charges of military treachery and murder. As for the state and whereabouts of Private Oswald Arthur Crane, they are still unknown. General George Crook, 1877. This is the truth, sir. Flecks of gunpowder and soot cling to the grease on my jaw. Someone sounds the bugle and someone fires. It is not me, but my name is called in the roll. I see the paint on their faces that must look uncannily similar to the turbid strokes of ash on my own cheeks, and I smell sulphur in the aching wind.
All right, you come on.
Someone calls for me, throws a heavy bag in my hand before he lets loose another volley from the cannons. Might have been Rudolph, but wrestling with my wagering nerves, I managed to drop the sack when I start fumbling with the cork that had been wedged almost flush with the bag's lip. Silver dust falls from the pouch when it hits the ground. The stopper rolls into a shallow puddle and bobs for a while, like a schooner trying to right itself on a tiny ocean. What held it there? What rule of our good Lord designed such a thing to be? To float. Oswald always said there is no God. Said everything is chemicals, just action and reaction. I'm not so sure if I agree, especially after that night, sir. Hours before, Oswald and I had been sitting in our tent smoking tobacco that he said was from his pa in Kentucky. He says he ain't ever been able to find anything worth stuffing his pipe with out here in Wyoming. I didn't know. Didn't like smoking pipe. It always gets in my eyes, and he'd laugh when they would start to smart. Oswald was a good man, though. He had his gumption about him and a strong jaw that lets him get away with things that most other people couldn't, like his refusal to button the collar of his uniform. "Jokes you," he'd say. "Can't kill a savage if your shirt's done killed you first." So he's blowing these chunky clouds of smoke in my face while I'm trying to eat breakfast, and he's telling me about the time a snapping turtle bit off his middle finger. He waves around the nub, above the steaming bowl I have in my hands, acting like he's stirring up my oats with it. I call him on his tall tail, like I always do. I say, "Last week I heard you say it was an opossum." But he just laughs and keeps going for my bowl. Oswald has this laugh, see? The kind that rides up in his nose and makes him whistle. It's queer, and you can hear it a mile away. He was always laughing, and the Crow don't like him very much, though, and the Shoshone hate him. He stomps around them like General Crook, calling them things like sleeps with ass and others. Despite all that, me and him managed to make friends with this crow that calls himself Snowbird. Has this big braid of down in its hair and a sharp chin that could cut glass. He's sitting with us around our fire, smiling every time Oswald starts giving me trouble. But Snowbird hasn't been himself since we crossed Goose River. He keeps rubbing dirt in his hands and chewing his lip, and every once in a while he closes his eyes really serious and lets out a deep breath. "Better eat something else your ribs will rattle right out of you," Oswald says, finally leaving me to finish my meal. Snowbird nods at him. "I did once already, before Rosebud Creek." Oswald doesn't look like he believes him and tucks his Jaeger tighter under his legs. Not any of my business anyway, but them crow are gonna eat up all your birdseed if you don't get to it first. Oswald laughs and hands me his pipe as he scoops up a handful of water from our pot for a drink. Satisfied, he throws himself onto his back with a wipe of his mustache, and Snowbird and I follow after. For a while, we just laid there under the fall clouds, watching the last couple leaves break from the oaks. Wyoming is quiet in fall, especially in the latter months, see? I'd gone to finishing school, but I still liked asking Snowbird stuff about the forest and other things. He was sharper than any teacher I ever knew, and ever since Bighorn, he had taught me and Oswald how to find mushrooms and rhubarb, how to listen to the birds for trouble, and how to turn the woods into a place that wasn't quite so strange. He liked fall, too. Snowbird says fall reminds us to be grateful for what we have before it's lost, and spring reminds us to be hopeful for the things that come back to us. Snowbird's just a kid, but sometimes he comes off with stuff that'll make your head spin. He's a real bright kid. I can hear Snowbird beside me rustling around with a pile of leaves. He holds up one as big as my face and frowns. It's rotten, has pox and black gunk all over it. I'm snug inside my Jaeger now, too. Got my empty bowl resting on my chest, and I check out Snowbird's little artifact. I spin the leaf in between my fingers like a zoetrope that the city kids have. Infection, he says, and I ask him what kind of infection. Don't know. Don't like these woods. Old Cheyenne say Bixby live here. They're a spirit with no home. Old Cheyenne say people get lost in these woods, never come back. He brings his hand up to the wooden owl he always has bound around his neck. His Zapalia. Right then, Oswald shoots up from his sack, throwing out his hands to hush us down. Takes a big sniff with his nostrils flared up. You smell that? We don't say anything, but he has this look on his face. Something don't smell right. Me and Snowbird quietly try to get a whiff of whatever he's caught onto. Snowbird is on his feet, crouched like a lion. I know that smell. Smells like a hot steaming barrel of hogwash. And he throws himself into a fit, rolling around and hollering like a banshee. It would have kept going all day if he hadn't rolled over his pipe and nearly burnt up his sack with him in it. Snowbird doesn't laugh, though, and I don't know whose lead to follow. Oswald is checking his bag for holes, wiping away patches of soot and trying to catch his breath before he speaks again. Now, I know a good ghost story when I hear one. The story of the naked widow down by Red River, the Mary Celeste out east. Even old Rudolph has got one about a hunting dog he used to have. And you know what all of them have in common? Snowbird looks away. They're all stories. Now, I don't think a man needs to reason to wear a bird around his neck all day like it's made of gold, but don't go slinging that hot mess around us like it's gospel truth. Snowbird doesn't say anything back. He just gets up, pats some underbrush from the tassels on his pants, and heads toward the camp where the other crow were staying. I watch him strut away, and I was always amazed at how he never made any sound when he moved. I swear that kid could run a mile on tack biscuits without cracking a single one. He was a good kid. I remember looking to the place where he had been lying, and looking at the body-shaped outline he had made in the dried-up leaves. It almost looked like someone was still there, just invisible or something, you know? Like it was made of air. Nothing really happened that day until the Cheyenne showed up. Came on quick, and we weren't ready. Oswald was still asleep, I suppose, when it all happened. But we didn't know until Crook tried to do a head count. When I realize he isn't there, I just start running. Don't even bother grabbing more powder, but my musket is on my back, beating against my shoulders with every step. Feels like another heart beating upon against mine. The cannons are behind me, pounding through the screams and calls for orders, like the Cheyennes' drums when they start killing. I remember the drums and the cannons. I remember the arrows, seeing the savages tear my friends apart with hatchets and tomahawks while they're still in their tents. I remember seeing my tent all shredded laying on the ground. McCarty was all tangled up in the mess of poles and fabric. His glossy boots were sticking out, still laced up tight. Yeah, I remember that. He was a kind man. I get to the clearing where Oswald had been, and I see 3 bodies. One on their back, 2 of them face down. One of the bodies, with their face in the dirt, has a tomahawk sticking out from his scalp. The other has 2 arrows in his back and is wrapped up in a wool sleeping bag. They look like saplings growing out of a burlap sack. Oswald. I fall to his side. He's breathing, but not much. He's making this sound like he's hissing every time he tries to suck in some air. I'm scared then. Scared he's going to be gone. Scared there is nothing I can do. My hands start to shake and I'm debating pulling out the arrows. Snowbird said something about that. You know, if something like this ever happened, but I can't find it in my head. Leave them in? Pull them out? I had to do something. I bring my hand around one of the arrows, and I remember how cold it felt. I needed to get it out of him. It would freeze him from the inside out, and he would just freeze and die, and no one would remember him, except me. I can see in my head his body lying there in the clovers, still in his Jaeger, alone. Snow covers his body in the winter, and when spring comes, he's still frozen like ice. The summer thaws him out, but if I do something, if I do anything, I can stop that. A hand reaches out and grabs mine. I trace the fingers back to an arm and to a face. It's the man on his back. It's Snowbird. He's got a nasty gash cut into his collar, and his right hand is hanging limp like a doll's. "Don't," he says in his real weak voice that's more of a squeak than anything. "It will just make it worse. Help me up." Snowbird is on his feet now, and he tells me to grab one side of Oswald's bag so we can get him safer somewhere. I start pulling Oswald inch by inch, getting him closer to the woods, but Snowbird isn't taking on much of the weight. He groans every time he tries to heave. He keeps letting go to grab his shoulder. It looks bad, and I can't watch him suffer. So I train my eyes on the body with the tomahawk. It's got all these shimmering beads of dew on its back, and as a slight drizzle comes on, the coils and splashes of paint on the body start to bleed down into the dirt. He's dead. Snowbird must have seen me staring. Hit me in the shoulder first, but he's dead. We manage to get to the woods and down into this ditch that looks like an old tributary to Rosebud Creek. Ivy and thistles are climbing up both banks, and dusty, jagged chunks of green shale litter the ground in the middle. We put Oswald there, and I start scraping dirt out of his mouth and nose. His gums are bleeding pretty bad by then. Looks like he cracked a tooth. From down there, we could still hear the fight going on, with the cannons going off and people yelling and all that. But in our fox den, it felt like the sound just flew over us. Grandmother Nature has given us a moment of sanctuary to help Oswald, Snowbird said, or something like that. I can't remember exactly, sir. Snowbird shows me how to break the arrows as close to the skin as possible so that we can roll him on his back, help him breathe right. I manage to get them snapped down, but it takes a while because Oswald starts to jerk around every time we touch him. We roll him over eventually, and he sucks in this painful lungful of air that hisses at us, like a viper as soon as he starts to draw his breath. I'm looking back and forth from Oswald to Snowbird, silently begging for some sort of instruction or consolation. Snowbird is returning the same look to me. His respectable brow has unusually slack. Keeps my gaze, and I see something. Something on his face. It's this sort of fluid glimmer that's just in the corner of his eye. I can hear a language that I do not understand from a voice that I do not recognize, coming from just over the ridge. Snowbird's lips are chapped and cut up. He's holding his limp arm tight to his side. His mouth sharpens into something that resembles a smile, and I can see just the tips of his teeth, like rows of ivory headstones, turned up the wrong way. The voices are getting closer now. Snowbird lets go of his sleeve and holds out a hand where, nestled in the valleys and lines of his open palm, is the wooden owl totem that he normally has perched around his collarbones. Its round, bulbous eyes peer up at me with a vacant expression, like the face of the moon. I held his hand in mine for only a mere moment, when a tear falls and diffuses into the blood on his fingers. He relinquishes the wooden carving to my care and leaves. Snowbird climbs up and over the bank, and there are screeches, a twang, a thud, and then silence once again. I retreat to Oswald and cradle him to my chest with my back against the ridge's ivy embankment. He was starting to squirm again, making these low, breathy moans. His mouth opens and closes like a carp out of water, like he's going to scream, like we're about to be caught. So I have to do it, for the both of us. He would have understood. I slide my hand over his mouth, and I can feel his hot breath squeeze through my fingers, like church mice through rotten floorboards. His teeth are scraping against my palm as he chomps for even a morsel of fresh air, and he starts to hiss again. I can feel a warm liquid start to seep through his sleeping bag and into my pant leg. He starts to jerk, starts to try to free his hands from the bag and claw at his face, but I can't let him. The past doesn't really matter in times like that, even if people would think that I had done them a favor. When he stops moving, I listen for the Cheyenne, and it's quiet. It's safe. Oswald is unconscious again at that point, but still alive. The air was cool and crisp against my cheeks when I dared to peek over the ridge and into the meadow. It was clear, no sign of anything, as if the hinterlands had already forgotten. A soft orange was painting the canopy above as the sun began to set. Night would come soon, and I couldn't go back to camp. I had my guesses, but in reality I could never have known what was waiting for us back there. I had no idea the battle was won, so I decided to stay in the woods, just until morning. I heft Oswald over my shoulders and head deeper into the trees. Even trudging through nets of nettle and underbrush, I can barely feel his weight on my back. The way the last dribbles of sunlight caught the moisture on my boots was mesmerizing. Kept me in step like this metronome I used to have as a kid. Mama made me take piano lessons with this Methodist pastor at our church, and he'd take the ticker out of my hand, put it above the keys, and flick the pendulum to life. How on earth do people concentrate with something like that going? Tick, 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 tick. Careful this time. More feeling. Remember your scales. Tick, tick, tick. Listen up. You're stiff as a board. Tick, tick. All right, I'll see you next time on Friday. Remember, when you're practicing, that accuracy is more important than speed. All right? Tick. It's night. Oswald has been dead for hours, but I'm still going. The forest had already undressed for the evening when I finally stopped marching and lay his body down on a bed of moss. It's still drizzling a bit, but his blood is all dried up, making the bag stick to his open mouth. He's beautiful in a way, though, like he's in the middle of a yawn. He's not scared, he's not hurting anymore. He doesn't know the guilty night is freezing and desolate. I rub my arms together and stare down at the body, and I'm able to make out the finer features on his face in the darkness, but just barely. Leaves and dead twigs are all caught in the knots in his hair, and his crow's feet are loose against his eyes. In his sack, the way he is, he reminds me of a baby calf just loose from the womb. I knew that in the morning Oswald wouldn't be coming with me. I couldn't carry him all that way. Not that he would have wanted that anyway. He wasn't real sentimental. Most people know that. It was hard to bear just leaving him out there, though. Just thinking about the animals that could get to him and such. He didn't deserve that. I slung my gun off my shoulder and managed to hook up the shoulder strap to my belt. So, I got this thick cable that I can hook to some of the grommets in his sleeping bag. I'm looking around for a good tree, something strong and tall. It was like looking for the right grave plot or headstone, except no one would know he was there. Eventually, there's this maple. Its branches are naked and gangly, but it has a skirt of 1,000 orange and red swatches. They crunch beneath my waffle stompers, and I can smell petrichor while I look for a branch that could hold his weight. He starts to slide deeper into the sack as he gets hoisted into the tree, and I can still see the burn marks from his pipe while he dangles there like the food bags we used to hang to keep away from the bears. Under his weight, the Jaeger bulges at the bottom and takes on a lumpy teardrop shape, like a cocoon cradling a moth never meant to fly. The pendulous mass swings lazily in the night's breeze as I sit, leaning against the trunk of that old tree. The wind hushes soggy leaves under my woolen trousers, leaving stains of brown ichor. They cling to me loosely, struggling to avoid being swept away, and the bow above me moans under Oswald's weight. I pull my arms out of my coat sleeves and cradle my chest, feeling the steady rhythm of my beating heart. The thought of a fire doesn't even cross my mind. Autumn's breath folds my eyes together tightly, and I fall asleep to the metallic clicking of the belt suspending Oswald right above me. Tick, 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 tick. I wake before daybreak. The crescent moon is still in the sky, ready to slice the horizon with its edge. I try to yawn, but the corners of my mouth are frozen together. So I'm trying to work my tongue through this little sliver I have in my lips to get them thawed when I look up at Oswald's nest, or what was left of it anyway. The bag was still tethered to the branch, just where I had left it. The belt was untouched, without a scratch. All the buckles and grommets were fine, but the bag had been slit by this one long slice. I would have grabbed my gun if I had any powder with me, because when a grizzly gets into a meal, it doesn't drag it. It just finishes what it's got right there. There's no bear in sight, though. No tracks, no viscera, nothing. I stand up to look at the sack and start thinking that there might not have even been a bear that night, or any other animal at all. Animals either chew their way through or make these long up-and-down slashes when they want to get into something. The hole in Oswald's bag is a single horizontal cut, perfectly clean and kind of bulging from the inside out. Frosted, bloody threads dangle on the outside from the freshly carved mouth, like Oswald had just crawled right out of the thing. I'm standing there under the arms of the gray maple, staring up into the ashen thatchwork above me, looking for any explanation for Oswald's escape. A dense fog is rolling in about that time, though, and there's a growing ache in my gut. I feel like I ate a handful of shot, like I might throw up if my jaw wasn't locked shut. And that's when I heard it, I swear. It's this laugh that sounds like it rides up in the nose. Makes the whistle you could hear from a mile away. Then I see him, and I do throw up. It, is in the mist, next to a twisted-up pine, and I can make out the silhouette as the sun begins to rise through the mist. It's hunched over. I see thick fluid lurch its way from the blackened shape of the head. With a quick twitch, it pulls itself up onto its toes and bends over deeper at the shoulders, cackling a whistle the whole way. The shadow is moving now, on tiptoes, folding and unfolding in the dark of the tree trunks. It's nearly impossible to make out its direction, just that it's moving somewhere on stilted legs like I've never seen. When you hear someone talk about fear, they usually talk about their heart racing or tunnel vision, but they never talk about the smell. General Crook. Fear smells bitter, like the blackest coffee you can imagine. It shoots up your nostrils right into your brain and makes the base of your skull tingle. It smells like raw beets or clay. The kind of things you'd eat when you get the stomach bug. By then, my empty stomach wasn't aching anymore, but I still smelled that creeping, sour fear, sir. I don't move. I have to know for sure. I'm having a hard time seeing it through the fog, but I know it's watching me. It probably smells the fear, too. The forest reeked of it. It's drawing in now, close enough to where I should hear footsteps, but I don't. I don't hear much of anything, noticing the unusual sounds of an old wood have died down to little more than the scraping of brittle leaves against the bark. All the forest had its gaping attention on the theater of horror. The metronome ticks in the chasm between my ears, opposite every gushing seizure of my beating heart. Time loped by slowly as the figure shifted silently closer. Closer. I see it clearly now. The leaves do not even crack underneath its boots. Then it stops. I stare into one of its milky, quivering eyes. The other hangs lazily against its dirty cheekbone, like a rotting plum. Whispering puffs of burning breath curl from its open mouth. I want to call out to him, but the knot of words is being forced so deeply in my throat that I can feel them sinking into my gut, fattening up my liver like a French goose savaged and swollen, ready to be dismembered for the sweet foie gras inside. My blood sizzles in my veins, and there is reflexive tension in my groin, in my thighs, that has turned into a spasm that nearly brings me to the ground. He lunges, and I don't move. I do nothing. For all I knew, everyone back at camp was dead, and by some cruel mistake, I'd been left behind to tally the grief, to bear the weight of 1,000 dead arrows. I see open hands with dagger-like claws. 9 long, jagged claws come down on me. The 10th seems to be missing, like a turtle or a possum had gotten to it. I remember that, I swear. They dive into my chest and breach, followed by aching crimson ribbons. I feel the vibrations of cracking bones wriggling through my spine up to my jaw, but all I hear is that laugh. He's happy, so I don't scream. His jaws clamp down like a bear trap onto my neck. I can feel his mustache on my cheek, his heart beating through his gums, hot ichor spilling into my open wounds. Then, with the force of a grizzly, he slings me into the air, sending me sailing disc-like through the trees. For a brief moment, I glimpse a barn owl, its outstretched wings dimly lit by the amber glow of morning. My flight is short-lived, and I come to rest upon a bed of fractured stone. I don't have the strength or the courage to look into my assailant's face, but I hear his laughter emanating from the woods. He's coming to finish the deed, to take me with him, to drag me to hell where I belong. I should have been there for him. I should have been there. From its perch, high above, the bird gazes with its saucer-like eyes upon the chaos below. The hungry fog rolls over the slate and into the crags between each stone, swallowing everything it touches until it reaches me. I close my eyes, ready for the other side. The sound of grinding, crunching bones heralds his approach. Taut fingers wrap around my ankles and pull. Violently, I'm dragged across frozen shards of broken earth. In the distance, I can make out the moaning dirge of the owl, and with that, I drift into oblivion. I woke up, not in hell, nor in heaven, but in a dank, frigid stockade, a prison to be sure. It's still far more desirable than the confines of my regret. The men say they found me half dead on the banks of Rosebud. They say I should be grateful, sir. Grateful for a formal execution. Now, I don't know what I believe in anymore, whether in God or in chemicals. I am, however, familiar with the allegations, and I realize what many are saying. I may be a coward, sir, but I am no traitor. The truth can be found in the cold wind on the cold earth along the shattered banks of Rosebud Creek. I did not kill Oswald Crane.
Chilling tales for dark nights.